It seems to me that the fundamental problem with the modern far left, which as a liberal I complain about, may in fact be much simpler than many people think. Behaviors like censorship of offensive ideas and over-analysis of proposed power structures are often explained as symptoms of globalism or neo-Marxism, and while I'm sure there's some truth to these claims, I would suggest that a major factor may simply be excessive empathy, or, dare I say, pathological empathy. The idea is that if someone has to face an unfair situation or an undeserved offense, no matter how trivial, or even if they potentially could face one, that's a big deal, and we need formal rules to prevent it. If you don't like something, go complain to your teacher, because your feelings matter. This mentality of excessive empathy could be summarized by a statement like, "My situation is not my fault, so I shouldn't have to fix it," or "You shouldn't have to deal with your emotions because it's someone else's fault you feel that way." This is a difficult position to argue against because, invariably, you will be accused of being unempathetic and cruel for not taking every possible step to help someone who, people claim, is suffering. You see what I mean? There's really no good way to make this kind of criticism not sound cruel. Who are you to tell someone that they're not suffering? In order to combat this type of excessive empathy, I think there's a key question we all need to ask, and that is, what degree of hardship or unfairness is it reasonable to expect people to overcome on their own, even though it's not their fault that it's happening? And, as a follow-up question, how much unfair hardship actually exists in the current year for the people in question? To use an analogy, if someone pushes you down into the mud, sure, it's not fair that you're now lying in the mud, but you can still be reasonably expected to get up and wipe yourself off, instead of lying there mumbling to yourself, "I didn't put mud on my face, so why should I be expected to wipe it off?" There has to be a point where the disadvantages facing you are small enough that you can be reasonably expected to overcome them on your own, even though it's technically unfair. Likewise, I think there also comes a point when the disadvantages facing you are so severe that you cannot be reasonably expected to improve them beyond a certain point. Now, I can't say for sure where these 2 points are, or how big the intervening gray area may be, so I think the only way to define them at all would be to look at specific examples, which I will do shortly. I bring this up because it seems to me that, in the last decade or so, the threshold for what counts as an unreasonable expectation in this sense has been lowered significantly, to the point where many people, okay, mostly young left-leaning college students, but many people, are demanding formal, top-down solutions to nearly every slight. See microaggressions. Modern feminists in particular seem to be of the opinion that no matter how minor the disadvantage is, that's all the excuse you need to give up because it's technically unfair. I can't be expected to go into engineering. There's a slight bias against women. I can't be expected to be careful when walking alone at night. That's so unfair. So, what exactly do I mean when I talk about a reasonable expectation for overcoming unfair circumstances? Well, let's first take a look at what I think we can all agree is an unreasonable expectation, the case of Robert Smalls. Robert Smalls was born into slavery in the United States in 1839, and in 1863, he commandeered a Confederate transport ship and escaped to the North, eventually being elected to Congress. This, I would say, is a completely unreasonable expectation to have of someone in that position. No one in their right mind would say, "Well, why didn't all slaves do that? It's so easy." Another example of what I would call an unreasonable expectation actually comes from my dad. Now, before you start screaming anecdotal evidence, please understand that I'm not using this to prove something. I'm just using it as an example. This could just as easily be a thought experiment. So, my dad was born poor, at least that's the way he tells it. Obviously, I wasn't around to verify it. In fact, his family was so poor that one day he walked in on his mother crying because she didn't know how she was going to feed him and his brothers. In that moment, she told him to work hard in school, get a good job, make something of yourself, don't be like me. And he did just that. Suffice it to say, he might have been able to retire when he was 50. Now, personally, I'd say this example is kind of a gray area in terms of what is reasonable to expect people to do, but I would lean more toward the unreasonable side of the spectrum, although, having done it himself, my dad has much higher expectations of the people around him, and he would probably say that what he did was, in fact, reasonable to expect of most people. Now, as an example of something that seems very reasonable, let's look at the case of Labour Party women in Britain not standing up to run for Prime Minister.
The trouble with the idea that it's all men's fault, or it's all the system's fault, is that then it seems to me that women are very often being set up to fail. That you're not going to succeed, you're not going to get to the top unless there are special measures. And when those special measures fail, you need more special measures. You need quotas, you need arrangements, you need some kind of special arrangement of one kind or another. And the net result of that, of course, is, first of all, you end up discriminating against other people. And secondly, you often promote people who aren't any good. And thirdly, even when they get in there, and they are close to the top, they still think that they're not good enough. Let me take an example. The proof of the pudding is in... The proof of the pudding is in the eating. We have had in this country one woman Prime Minister. One woman Prime Minister. We had Margaret Thatcher. We had one woman Prime Minister who said, I am not a feminist, and feminism is poison. And she meant that because she felt that she was able, and if she could do it, other women could, and she was right to come through the system long before equality. She did not bleat about how men were going to hold her back. She did not say that I've got to wait until the rules change. She did not say there's got to be quotas. She just went for it. In 1975, when she saw a vacancy for the leadership of her party, she went for it. Now, we have a very distinguished cabinet minister sitting, former cabinet minister sitting here on the other side. Has there yet been a woman leader of the Labour Party? No. Will there be at the next election a woman, a Labour Prime Minister? No. And one of the reasons is that last time they had a chance to stand, there were 81 Labour women MPs, and only one stood, and that was Diane Abbott. Harriet Harman didn't stand. The Honourable Lady sitting opposite didn't stand. When push came to shove, and they're all feminists now, when the chance came to lead their great party, when the chance came to fight an election where they might actually become Prime Minister of this country, they chickened out. That's what feminism does to you.
Despite all their advantages, despite being in the right place at the right time and having the chance presented right to their faces, they still chose not to pursue this path. If they really want a female prime minister, if they really want a female leader of the Labour Party, I think it is very reasonable to expect these women to deal with any bias they think they might encounter along the way. And just for good measure, as another example of reasonable expectations, I'd like to share a personal story from a friend of mine who is a male elementary school teacher. He was being shown around his new school along with a group of other new teachers, and the teacher giving the tour mentioned that, in their opinion, it was great that he was there because they need more male teachers. To which someone else in the group said, "Men can't be teachers." Now, he didn't tell me this story to bitch about how difficult his new job was. It was a very kind of throwaway story. He just mentioned it to be like, yeah, I mean, that's just what you got to deal with. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. So like I said at the beginning of this video, I think a major problem of the modern far left is excessive empathy, and the fact that what they see as a reasonable expectation of people has dropped dramatically. If something's even the slightest bit unfair to someone, we should empathize with them and try to fix the problem for them. You know, problems like having to say, "excuse me," to people on the train.